Chances are you have already made up your mind about the 1995 Batman sequel, Batmanforever. As a comic book loving teenager, I vocally hated the movie when it was released. But yet, for all of my dislike, I have since watched the film many times over. It clearly did something very right. It was a huge box office smash, and here I am talking about it 30 years later. It's a film full of contradictions. Despite the producer credit of previous Batman director Tim Burton, I was so disappointed discovering that the film was the opposite of his dark gothic world with a limited colour palette. Or was it? Instead, it was replaced with a world of chaotic, manic garishness and over-the-top performances. Except, that's not entirely true. And it was executed by its director as a light, live-action comic book full of colour to help sell child-friendly merchandise. However, did it ignore the darker graphic novel Batman completely? Ironically, while it is not my favourite of the series, I think it has, by its own logic, easily the best screenplay of the original Batman movies, and I have read 3 of the available drafts. My favourite by far is the earliest version that I could find. But does that mean that something was lost along the way? There's a lot that frustrates me about Batmanforever, but at the same time, there's a lot that's really wonderful. Like one of its villains, Batmanforever is split down its centre on many things. Like all of its characters to some degree, it's an identity crisis of a film. Can 2 things be true of Batmanforever? Why does it contain so many contradictions? Let's explore those contradictions. Batman was created in 1939 by Bob Kane and Bill Finger for Detective Comics. Millionaire Bruce Wayne witnesses the murder of his parents and seeks vengeance on the criminals of Gotham City, where he lives, dressed in a bat costume. Shortly afterwards, Batman was given a sidekick. A young circus acrobat named Dick Grayson witnesses the death of his own parents during a public performance. He becomes the ward of Bruce Wayne, and soon the boy wonder, Robin. The Caped Crusader made his way to the screen several times with Lewis Wilson and Robert Lowery in serials of the 1940s. By 1966, Batman became both a TV series and a movie starring Adam West and Burt Ward as Batman and Robin. It ran for 3 seasons between 1966 to 1968. After much development, a big-budget Batman movie was released in 1989, directed by Tim Burton, a young former Disney animator who had made a couple of quirky and visually striking movies. Reflecting the dark and violent tone of the very current and influential Frank Miller Batman comics. But bringing in Burton's own absurd and offbeat direction, the film, which had Batman going up against villain the Joker, became an immediate box office hit, and rode a worldwide pop culture phenomenon known as Batmania. With an amazing marketing campaign, many advertising brands were fortunate to cash in on the success of the film, and well in advance of the movie's release. Lots of publications later noted that retail sales amounted to $500 million or more. A sequel followed in 1992, again directed by Burton. This time the director was given much more creative control, allowing him to indulge more in Batman as an outsider fantasy, arguably even more mean-spirited. This was a film about comic book heroes and villains in which good and evil weren't quite as clearly delineated. Before the film's release, the Motion Picture Association of America had Burton compromising the use of the film's screen violence. Batman Returns was also a gigantic hit, with a $47 million box office weekend. Many brand names were once again keen to be associated with another Batman movie. These included series newcomers McDonald's, who wanted to embrace The Dark Knight with their child-targeted Happy Meal tie-ins. But the film invited criticism from parents. Entertainment Weekly reported that McDonald's hadn't even seen a rough cut of the film, and they had prepared 2 types of TV commercial for the movie. One playing during the daytime aimed at children and not promoting attendance to the movie, as well as separate nighttime commercials aimed at an older audience.
With all the McDonald's toys, it's making it sound like it is for kids, and it's not.
We have a classic illustration here of kind of the Hollywood and the corporate community being out of touch with the family and out of touch with kids.
In a New York Times article, a spokesperson for McDonald's said their campaign wasn't intended to encourage young kids to see the movie. By mid-July, box office had fallen by over 40% each week. Just a month and a half after the film's release, Entertainment Weekly reported that Warners were now looking towards a lighter future Batman sequel, possibly without Burton as director. A hugely successful animated series followed in late 1992, and the following year saw the theatrical release of the animated movie Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, but it failed to capture the box office. Now attached to a potential Catwoman movie, Burton was not directing a third Batman film. Warner Brothers turned to a trusted director who was in pre-production on a new adaptation of a popular John Grisham novel. The director was born in New York of 1939, the same year that Batman was created, and he grew up in an apartment in Long Island City, Queens. Schumacher's Baptist father Francis died when the boy was only 4 years old, and he was brought up by his dress-selling mother Marion, who worked all possible hours to support them both. Schumacher later told Newsweek that in a sense he lost his mother when he lost his father. With a lot to deal with at such a young age, Schumacher found much needed escapism, reading the comics of Batman. His other escape was in his local cinema, the Sunnyside Movie Theatre. Schumacher told Hampton's Film that he hated everything to do with childhood, and since the age of 5 he wanted to be a teenager. He would ride through New York City, his eyes open to real life and the culture of the world around him. Age 7, he avoided children's movies and was captured by the image of a lonely child looking over his father's headstone in a windswept grave dwarfed by a creaking tree. The film was David Lean's adaptation of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. Young Joel found the haunting images to be all too relatable. Dickens' story of a young poor boy who would be thrust into a world of riches gave young Schumacher a burning desire to pursue that unknown lifestyle and a world of success and money. Age 9, he began his working life, helping out his mother and delivering meat for a local butcher. Schumacher told The Guardian many years later, "I started drinking at 9. I started doing drugs in my early teens. I started smoking at 10. And I started sex at 11. At 16, he lied about his age and got a job at Macy's department store. During the 1960s, Schumacher studied at Parsons School of Design, winning various awards. He also studied at the Fashion Institute of Technology while window dressing the famous Henry Bendel store as their youngest display director. Deep down, he hated fashion and loved movies, but needed to make money for his mother. On graduation in 1965, he became one of the hip new designers at Youthquake boutique fashion shop Paraphernalia in New York. He was now living a successful lifestyle. Sadly, his mother Marion died. Depressed, Schumacher resorted even more to hard drugs such as speed, acid and heroin, living an intense nightlife, afraid to be seen in the daylight. In 1966, his professional fortunes continued to flourish, taking the job as head of design at Revlon. Following this, Schumacher worked with renowned fashion designer Halston on his first dress collection. But he was still descending into a very bad place with his own intense inner demons. Finally, with $50,000 in debt and 5 teeth missing, around 1970, Schumacher fought off the hard drug addiction, burying his syringes in the snow of Central Park, and went back to work as a window dresser at Bendel's. The shop's progressive mentality enabled Schumacher to be playful with his presentation. His displays included a cosmopolitan approach to mannequins, whom he dressed in coffee-coloured paint, and showing off his innate taste for visual storytelling with a fake smashed window and cowering mannequins on the other side of it. Through film producers such as Dominic Dunn and Howard Rosenman, he moved to Hollywood and became a costume designer. After designing a handful of movies, Schumacher collaborated with director Woody Allen on the film Sleeper. The costume designer confided to the filmmaker of his desire to direct movies. Allen told the aspiring director that he should find his route via screenwriting. Influenced by Robert Altman's ensemble style, Schumacher would write 3 produced screenplays, Sparkle, Car Wash, and The Wiz, and reflecting his curious, multicultural outlook and New York upbringing. All of these were musicals, starring black characters. After success directing a few TV movies, Schumacher started a career as a feature films director across a wide variety of genres. His first big studio success was the 1985 Brat Pack film St. Elmo's Fire. By 1993, he was on a roll. Pertinent to Batman, he had directed bat-like horror in The Lost Boys, a kind of vigilante movie with Falling Down, and explored gothic guilt in Flatliners. On the back of Lost Boys, Schumacher was chosen by Andrew Lloyd Webber to direct another film about a masked man who lives in a gothic cave, which he eventually made in the 2000s. According to Batmanforever executive producer Michael Uslan in the documentary Icons Unearthed, Schumacher initially pitched a Batman idea to the studio more in line with Tim Burton's world, which was rejected. Schumacher himself has said that he wanted to direct an adaptation of Frank Miller's Batman Year One. Warner Brothers chairman Bob Daly and Terry Semel told the New York Times that they wanted a little more fun and brighter Batman movie than Batman Returns, with a hip sensibility. In a 1995 interview with Charlie Rose, the director politely claimed he wasn't given any directives from Warner Brothers, but was simply told to have fun with the project. After seeking out Tim Burton for his approval, the director took on the film. According to an interview with Forbes magazine, one of Schumacher's first activities was to attend toy fairs and conventions in Las Vegas, convincing distributors that there would be a market for another Batman film. Schumacher recalled that many toys from Batman Returns had been returned to retailers because of the blunderous marketing to children. Warner Brothers asked action movie veteran Peter McGregor Scott to produce the new Batman movie, and he was already hard at work on the studio's latest film, The Fugitive. Young screenwriters Lee and Janet Scott Batchelor, who were having major success with a spec script called Smoke and Mirrors, were approached to write the new Batman screenplay. They impressed Tim Burton with their desire to focus on the duality of the Batman characters. Joel Schumacher also wanted to make a film about Batman fighting Bruce Wayne. The Batchelors were told to bring in another villain, so they suggested the Riddler. They also had to include the character of Robin. Previously, Marlon Wayans had been cast as Robin in an earlier draft of Batman Returns, in which the character was reconfigured as a nameless teenage mechanic who appears halfway through the film to save the Batmobile and pays off at the end before disappearing. Michael Keaton was to return as Batman, with Chris O'Donnell cast as Dick Grayson, aka Robin. Schumacher wanted actor Tommy Lee Jones, whom he was working with on The Client, to play the character of Harvey Dent, aka villain Two-Face, ahead of a script even being completed. According to Peter McGregor Scott, he set up the deal informally. Before production on Batmanforever, Jones would win an Oscar for McGregor Scott's production of The Fugitive. Unhappy with the direction of the new Batman 3 script, Michael Keaton left the project. In his place, Schumacher chose the younger actor Val Kilmer, whom he'd seen in the movie Tombstone. A love interest played by Rene Russo was reportedly offered to Sandra Bullock, but Nicole Kidman ended up playing the part. Robin Williams was courted as the Riddler, but eventually the role would go to a hot new comedian, Jim Carrey. The Batchelors had to leave the film for prior commitments, so Akiva Goldsman, who had just written John Grisham's The Client for Schumacher, came on board to polish the script. It was reviewed by McDonald's, who this time were marketing only to adults. Under the title Blinko, the production would film from the 24th of September 1994 to March of 1995. Batman is trying and failing to capture villain Two-Face, aka former District Attorney Harvey Dent, who was turned evil through a chemical attack. Our hero meets criminal psychologist Dr. Chase Meridian. On the other side of Batman, one of Bruce Wayne's tech employees, named Edward Nygma, asks to immediately test a brainwave machine that he has invented, which can put a TV signal directly into the human brain. Wayne rejects this, so Nygma secretly tests a prototype on his boss, revealing that it can read anyone's minds. Nygma murders his boss, leaves his job, and becomes villain the Riddler. He leaves riddles in envelopes for Wayne. Bruce enlists the help of Chase Meridian to analyze the messages and ends up taking her on a date to the circus. Here, Two-Face holds the venue hostage and demands that Batman reveal himself, or a bomb will be detonated. Fortunately, it is stopped by acrobatic family the Flying Graysons. In return, Two-Face murders all of the Graysons except for their youngest son, Dick. Bruce adopts the angry teen. The Riddler teams up with Two-Face and has a plan. Two-Face will steal money to fund Nigma's project to capture the brainwaves of Gotham citizens through an addictive commercially sold device called the Box, which can read anyone's mind. Dick learns of Batman's secrets and has his own superheroic aspirations. Will Batman, or rather maybe the dynamic duo, save the day? Was Batmanforever a sequel? In an interview with Superhero Stuff You Should Know, concept designer Tim Flattery said that he was told at the time of pre-production that Warner Brothers wanted a new look for Batman in all departments. Schumacher was clearly encouraged to do his own take on the material, but it's quite obvious that this was still continuing the world begun by Tim Burton and Michael Keaton. The Bachelor's script specifies that the Batmobile is updated. The villains from the previous movies were to appear in the climax. Jack Napier, a creation of the Burton-Keaton movies, is referenced in an earlier draft by Akiva Goldsman. In the film, Chase Meridian indirectly references the Catwoman of Batman Returns.
Or do I need skin-tight vinyl and a whip?
Michael Gough and Pat Hingle both reprise their roles as Bruce Wayne's butler Alfred and Commissioner Gordon. An interview conducted during the film's post-production explains how the film's new composer, Elliot Goldenthal, was still unsure at this stage if he would carry over Danny Elfman's iconic music from the previous Batman movies. Batmanforever visually recreates the death of Bruce Wayne's parents, clearly inspired by Frank Miller's Batman Year One, but in its own way it emulates the earlier screen recreation of this that we saw in 1989's Batman. Look at this shot alone. Both images appear completely their own. The respective scenes play out differently, yet in this moment, so many details are the same. The mid-shot shot size, right of frame looking camera left, the collared coat, the right hand holding the gun, the smoke and shadow. Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne was a more introverted take on the character. Batmanforever has a younger, more dashing Bruce Wayne, who appears entirely functional and the best person he can be. Keaton's Wayne had a colder, more distant exterior, but had inner warmth that he couldn't quite communicate. Kilmer is warm, but has unresolved inner darkness. According to Schumacher in Time magazine, there was friction on the film's set between Kilmer and himself, which got horribly physical. Kilmer claims that this was related to the director not allowing him to see his film performance during dailies. The Bachelors went to great lengths to make Bruce a much more positive and empathetic character than in the previous movies. A Bruce Wayne as a leader and a manager of people, in charge, not the eccentric introvert lost at his own party. In The Bachelor's script, Wayne Tech is a corporation that Bruce himself founded as part of Wayne Enterprises and not inherited from his parents. The Bachelors gave the Wayne Tech building a hydroelectric dam, making it positive for the environment. They described the headquarters as a spotless, healthy electronic corporation, resting on the harbour of Gotham City, its power from a small but mighty dam below. Akiva Goldsman's earlier draft built on this idea, with Wayne Tech investing in solar power, which appears in his earlier rewrite. In the film, a newscaster explains how Wayne Tech has a profit-sharing program. Bruce also pays full benefits to the family of Wayne Tech supervisor Fred Stickley, who is suspected of suicide despite the Wayne Corporation insurance policy not covering it. Bruce Wayne is also mentioned as the main donor at the film's charity circus event. Additionally, the shooting script mentions that the Wayne Foundation contributes a fortune to anti-crime programs. As Batman, Kilmer has a tall physical presence, giving dignity to even the most silly-looking moments of comedy. More than any other comic book, Frank Miller's graphic novel, The Dark Knight Returns, the angry satire about media-distorted Reagan-era USA from 1986, had an unlikely but constant influence on Batmanforever. The film directly adapts Miller's scene in which Bruce is haunted by the memory of a terrifying bat he once found in a cave as a child. It was a nightmarish image, and in response to his parents' murder, he adapted it as his masked alter ego. In their original draft, the Bachelors had young Bruce randomly running around rabbit holes outside of Wayne Manor before falling into the cave, which was also taken from The Dark Knight Returns. Additionally, they had Two-Face telling Batman during the helicopter chase, "We're the same, you and me. 2-2, two men in one," which haunts Bruce. Adapted and filmed from The Bachelor's draft was a scene in which Bruce loses his memory of Batman after Two-Face and Riddler attack Wayne Manor, and Alfred points out to Bruce that he has never faced his inner demons, one of which is the fear he felt of seeing a large bat as a child and how he adopted it as his own image. Adult Bruce then faces the image of a giant bat. To realise this scene for the movie, a magnificent giant bat was built by special makeup effects supervisor Rick Baker and his team with an 18-foot wingspan and radio controls. A smaller bat with a 5-foot wingspan and cable controls was also constructed and used for more distant shots. In Akiva Goldsman's early pass of the film, the writer imparted his own psychological knowledge. Goldsman gave Bruce the memory of a red leather book, a diary of his father. Bruce recalls that the last entry of his living days described how Bruce insisted on taking his parents to the cinema. Bruce feels guilt for making his parents take him to the screening, which he believes brought them to their deaths. Goldsman adjusted Two-Face's recurring line to Batman from "We're the same, you and me," 2-2, two men in one, to
"You're a killer too, and you know it!"
Goldsman had young Bruce at his parents' wake, taking the Red Book and running through a storm, falling through a sinkhole, where he discovers the cave and meets a giant bat. Goldsman also inserted recurring, poetic images of falling roses. In Goldsman's later production script, Bruce's mind plays tricks on him, as on random occasions he suffers hallucinations where both the red leather book randomly appears and Two-Face accuses Bruce of being a killer out of context. The shooting script had Chase confess her feelings for Bruce, and he admits his guilt, taking her into his past. They kiss, which reveals Batman's identity to Chase, as she had kissed him earlier. Curiously, the version I read had a page missing during this scene. Along with the memory loss caused from Two-Face's gun, Bruce revisits the cave, finds the book and discovers that it was his parents who actually chose the visit to the cinema. It was a Zorro movie that led to their murder, a unique element that Frank Miller had brought to The Dark Knight Returns. On learning this, adult Bruce then faces the image of a giant bat, meaning that Bruce was never responsible for their deaths. In the finished film, all of the poetic repetition and Bruce facing his fears was condensed to one flashback after Bruce adopts Dick, in which the young Wayne witnesses his parents' murder. Goldsman's Red Book is set up as written, and Chase identifies it as Bruce's repressed memory. The scene where Bruce and Chase confess their feelings to one another presents Bruce's encounter with the bat, which was footage of Rick Baker's smaller puppet. The film edit removes Bruce's following amnesia and need to find the book and confront the giant bat. This is the first time in this Batman film series that we learn the origin of the Batman identity, with young Bruce having seen a bat and later adopting the image of it as a crime fighter. When Keaton was replaced with the younger actor as the film's protagonist, it was felt that a younger love interest was needed. Schumacher was known as a master caster with an eye for discovering young on-camera talent. According to Cinefantastique magazine, Joel Schumacher had pursued Sandra Bullock for this role, and the LA Times stated that the movie While You Were Sleeping may have contractually prevented Bullock from doing the new Batman film. Schumacher later denied that Bullock had been pursued for the part. Nicole Kidman became Dr. Chase Meridian in a perfect comic book wig reminiscent of Veronica Lake. While she doesn't have much to do and is very much a female character of the time, Kidman gives the character much charm with a twinkle in her eye. The criminal psychologist is conservative in appearance, like Kim Basinger as photographer Vicky Vale in the 1989 Batman film, but on the inside is secretly sexually assertive, like Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. It's a side she reserves only for Batman, whose mind she is obsessed with. From her very first scene, Chase has an inappropriate professional manner with Batman, treating him as a fetishistic sexual fantasy. By contrast, she is colder and more standoffish with Bruce Wayne, but grows in the film to fall in love with him. She's introduced to our hero as being independent, practicing self-defense, and gets to throw an effective punch later on, even if she basically becomes a damsel in distress. The Bachelors had made her a bit more of a cheeky, irreverent and blunt character, with her own agency, a little deluded and selfish, pushing Bruce to the limits of his dual identity. In the Bachelor script, Bruce makes a point of this being refreshing to him. She's brilliant, no pretentious psychobabble, cuts right to the heart of things. When Meridian turns on the bat signal, she doesn't even disguise that she does it for selfish reasons. Akiva Goldsman's drafts seem to turn Chase into a more professional facilitator of Bruce Wayne's feelings, using Goldman's own background as a child of psychologists. As a result, a lot of her character became more subdued, with much more subtext to the dialogue. The Bachelor's version of Bruce Wayne inviting Chase to the circus is much snappier. A red-hot exchange in which Chase mocks Bruce, stands her ground on not dating clients, and it forces Bruce to really up his game and match her wit. Which he does. In the film, this sequence is much briefer and trying to lather on subtext, which dulls the character. It ends with Bruce making a random and inappropriate statement that he must get Chase out of her clothes and into a black dress. Perhaps it's a bit more earnestly romantic, but a little creepy, although you could argue that so is Chase with Batman, so maybe that's the point. In the Bachelor draft, she uses Bruce to set up a date with Batman, in which she sleeps with the Cape Crusader off camera, although he is fully masked, and she doesn't get to know his secret identity. Batman, rather than Bruce Wayne, then pours out to her his psychological trauma, how he fell down a hole and witnessed a giant bat, hence adopting their image, a much more original approach and somewhat absurdist, more in line with Tim Burton's sensibilities. Maybe this earlier iteration of the main female character felt a little more authentic because it was actually written by a woman. Chris O'Donnell plays an angry Dick Grayson. This interpretation is very much an older teen heartthrob version of Robin, for the era of Beverly Hills 90210. Schumacher has said that he didn't want to patronise the teenagers of the 1990s and that they had a lot to deal with in their lives. O'Donnell has said that when Michael Keaton was to play Batman, the dynamic between their characters would be much more like that of a father and son. Schumacher filmed a repeated image where Dick's hand is first caught by his father and later by Bruce in the finale, to maybe suggest Bruce becoming a father figure to Dick, but that bond ends there. The dynamic of Schumacher's dynamic duo works so well because for most of the film, they strongly oppose each other. Dick is cocky and is clearly not much younger than Bruce. He agrees to stay with the young millionaire to avoid social service red tape so he can immediately go after Two-Face. Bruce wants to protect Dick from revenge-driven crime fighting, which strongly mirrors and triggers his own history. And Dick sees Bruce's authority as unearned. In The Bachelor's early draft, Commissioner Gordon explains that Dick is 16 years old, therefore not desirable for adoption, and the circus cannot adopt him as their own. It suspends Dick Grayson in a kind of annoying bureaucratic limbo that allows the filmmakers to create a much more adult-facing Robin. Schumacher has said he grew up having always known Batman with Robin in the comic books, and like a young Joel Schumacher, in the movie, Grayson wants to get to adulthood and he wants his independence. Schumacher saw Grayson as a toughened traveller who is now being forced into a permanent base. The Bachelors had taken the comic book circus origin story of Robin, but made it their own for the movie. They knew a former circus performer and based the Grayson family on their working methods. The movie plays with the mythology of the character's name. In The Bachelor's script, the name Robin comes from Batman observing how Dick's largely green circus costume looks like that of Robin Hood. Akiva Goldsman's script had the nickname Robin given to him by his father when he saved his brother from a broken high wire performance. The backstory emphasises how important Dick's father was to him as a role model. The absence of this father figure is then used to fuel the friction between Bruce and the young man. As far back as the Bachelor script, Dick makes it clear that any father-son relationship between the two of them is out of the question, but they grow to become partners. The Bachelor's script had a scene where Bruce eventually embraces and calls his ward a good friend. In the film, Grayson first appears in a masked version of his gymnast costume to save Batman in an abandoned subway. In The Bachelor's early script, Robin was not just to have saved Batman in the abandoned subway station, but to join him in hand-to-hand combat against Two-Face's thugs, before crossing paths with the police and the press, forcing Batman into the awkward position of publicly having a sidekick. A training montage then follows, with Bruce and Dick, in which they swim, master remote-controlled batarangs, and analyse criminals on the computer, with young Grayson eager to get to physical training. Bruce informs Dick that 90% of his job is investigative, and only 10% is physical. There is conflict over Bruce's rule that a crime fighter does not kill, and a deeply vengeful Dick leaves the cave as he had sworn on his parents' grave that he will kill Two-Face. Goldsman had Dick and his brother saving money for his parents' retirement as his father's knee was going. They were making plans to improve their families' lives, only for it all to be taken away. Dick's brother Mitch was named after O'Donnell's stunt double, Mitch Gaylord. Michael Gough as Alfred is the intervening father figure for both Bruce and Dick, who thanklessly unites them both. Alfred doesn't get too much screen time, but he holds both Batman and Robin together as individuals. I like how Dick Grayson is cocky towards the butler, who is hugely patient, while Bruce isn't as understanding, as he's arguably not quite a fully formed adult himself yet either. Michael Gough effortlessly navigates the drama and comedy with the reliable, custom gentle touch established on the earlier Batman movies. The actor is clearly aware that he makes a major impact on the movie doing little, but savours his lines. There's huge satisfaction in watching Alfred's delicate guidance and overall presence, apart from this undignified moment. Then there are the villains. Two-Face, the film's most literal, visual representation of duality. Tommy Lee Jones told VH1 that he was acting in a cartoon, and he placed the first ever screen version of Two-Face as a cackling animated character in a hideous, hot pink, animal print glam metal fursuit. Costume designer Bob Ringwood had conceived this much more punk-influenced suit, which Schumacher rejected. Multi-Oscar winning makeup effects artist Rick Baker was enlisted to design the villain's face, with application by V. Neal and hairstylist Yolanda Tusing. It took 2 people to apply the Two-Face makeup. According to Tommy Lee Jones, in an interview with Bobby Wygant, it took 4 hours to apply and 1.5 hours to take off, but came down to 2 hours to apply and 45 minutes to remove. According to V. Neal, the 2.5-hour application became 90 minutes. Jones said that a 5-day working week wearing the makeup would distress the skin, and 2 consecutive 5-day working weeks would cause the skin injury. The makeup consisted of 5 to 6 separate foam rubber prosthetics. 85 sets of these were made up for Tommy Lee Jones to cover his 50 days of filming as the bad guy. As reported in Cinefex, to look like the comic book illustrations of Two-Face with a big eye and teeth, Baker would have needed to give Tommy Lee Jones a different facial prosthetic and fake dentures, which would have restricted the actor's ability to perform underneath it. Baker wanted to give Two-Face's scarred side a contact lens with pulled skin beneath it, but Jones rejected this. Baker wanted the split line between skin and scar to appear blurred, with the burn sides elevated. Joel Schumacher decided instead on a clean split between the 2 sides. Jones' interpretation of Two-Face is a precise, physical comedy performance, heightened in every way. When asked by VH1 about the over-the-top nature of his character, and if he questioned how far he should go with it, Jones tellingly remarked,
"Well, how far is too far? I don't know. Somebody's supposed to tell me that."
In the final film, there is absolutely no motivation for Two-Face. He inexplicably wants Batman dead. A lot became watered down in the script rewriting process. In The Bachelor's original draft, prior to becoming Two-Face, Harvey Dent considered Batman to be a friend. Two-Face believed that Batman caused his mind-altering physical disfigurement and was now resentful of how Batman hid his alter ego when both of Dent's dual personalities were on display for all to see. This is why he attacks the circus. He believes only a prominent, well-known man would need to mask themselves and deduces that they would be present at the circus event. In the mind of Two-Face, Batman is a hypocritical, monstrous equal to himself. More importantly to the plot, the desire to unmask Batman gives him a clear motivation to align himself with Riddler's mind-reading device. A line found in none of Goldsman or the Bachelor scripts made it into the end of the film.
Yes, of course you're right, Bruce. Thank you. You've always been a good friend.
This may have been recorded during editing, or changed during filming. In the context of the movie, it's confusing and nonsensical, because Harvey Dent and Bruce Wayne have never acknowledged or interacted with one another, and Two-Face takes delight in ruining and shooting Wayne. Dent's origin is shown once in a news report where crime boss Maroni hurls acid at his face, as Batman is late to the scene. This was repeated in the earlier drafts where both the Bachelors and Goldsman had linked Two-Face and Batman through repeated flashback imagery. Two-Face has two romantic partners who are supposed to represent the dual sides of himself, Sugar and Spice. They were named Leather and Lace in earlier drafts, but were toned down to reflect the film's more family-friendly approach. Debbie Mazar doesn't have much to do as a loud and grotesque gangster's mole, but she gives Spice much more personality than ended up on the page. Surprisingly, hers was the most work-intensive of all the makeups in the film, even more so than Two-Face. Only one person applied all of her look, and 5 pieces of wig had to be made up from scratch for her every day. Drew Barrymore as a quiet, porcelain version of Marilyn Monroe is given a much more interesting and cleverly deceptive part that was brilliantly beefed up in an Akiva Goldsman later draft. At the Nigmatech party, she is set up as being a submissive and unhappy +1 to Edward Nigma. When Bruce Wayne introduces himself to her, she seems genuinely surprised and charmed to be noticed. It sets up an idea that maybe with this unknown and newfound respect, she might change sides and become a double-cross informant for the good guys. This then turns into a double-cross within a double-cross, as she manipulates Bruce into using the box for Edward. Around this time, Barrymore had a real knack for making a small role go a really long way. More importantly, Barrymore really understands the tone of the movie, playing it all small and real, and letting the audience come to her while knowing how to physically move and make the most of the comic book setting. On that subject, Kilmer, Kidman, O'Donnell and Goff also all play their roles straight in spite of the heightened reality. Pat Hingle, returning as Commissioner Gordon, in a kind of glorified cameo, sort of plays a buffoonish version of the same character from the previous films. This wasn't entirely the case in The Bachelor's earlier drafts. Ed Begley Jr. as Nigma's boss Fred is mostly played as a full-out cartoon character. Character actor Joe Grafasi is dubbed to seem as equally caricatured. Yet many other roles are played entirely straight, so there's no consistency. Schumacher's brief was to make a live-action comic book, and the most all-out comic of the performances is that of Jim Carrey as Edward Nigma, aka the main villain of the film, the Riddler. A comedic performance in which Schumacher, realizing the production value of Carrey as a performer, photographs the actor like a stand-up comic, letting him play out his very choreographed comedy before the camera, largely uninterrupted. The Bachelor's original name for Nigma was Lyle Heckendorf, and he was to have found his costume at the circus in a leprechaun-themed fortune-telling booth. This evolved into the character of the Guesser, a novelty fortune-telling prop in a cabinet seen in Nigma's apartment. The production had intended for the Guesser to be a kind of published pulp character whom Nigma takes his visual identity from. If this is the case, why does nobody recognise the Guesser costume? Why didn't they just call this fortune-telling character the Riddler? The Riddler remained pretty much the same throughout the script revisions. The finest addition to Akiva Goldsman's drafts is here, with this simple line change.
You were supposed to understand. I'll make you understand.
The key to Nigma is how he feels betrayed by Bruce Wayne when their first meeting doesn't go the way that he'd planned it all out in his head, and how he felt he was entitled to the result that he wanted. This leads to what the film is really about. Joel Schumacher and The Bachelors wanted to make a film about duality, and certainly from the original script through to the finished film, it is definitely there. In the closing of their draft, The Bachelor's script made Bruce's duality something beyond his control. Just as there was never a choice for me, I was always Bruce Wayne and Batman. I just had to let myself see that. Akiva Goldsman made it about choice. You see, I am Bruce Wayne and Batman, not because I have to be.
No, because I choose to be.
Alfred says to Bruce about Dick, young men out for revenge need guidance, and he reminds Bruce, you above all should know the consequence of the life you choose. Dick reveals his father's motto, every man goes his own way. At one point, Bruce decides to stop being Batman and confesses to Dick that he feels alone because of his vengeance-filled actions and doesn't want him to follow this route. Chase admits to Bruce that she has always chosen the wrong kind of man. With a villain who makes decisions on a coin flip, Batmanforever is a film about how we make choices, and specifically who we choose to be, behind and before our exteriors, and frames it through a parasocial lens. Parasocial relationships exist between a person and someone they do not know in real life, for example, a celebrity or a fictional character. Bruce Wayne is often framed as a tabloid celebrity. His face is on the cover of numerous news publications seen throughout the movie. Edward Nygma idolizes and decides how he believes Wayne should talk to him, before ever meeting him, turning on him when the scene doesn't play out as he'd expect it to. Similarly, Chase does the same with Batman, whom she speaks to immediately, as though he isn't a stranger. Throughout the various drafts of the script, there is a strong tabloid trash TV celebrity element, very much of its time. The Bachelor's script at one point describes Lyle Heckendorf as looking partly like the CNN chief Ted Turner. GNN, Gotham Network News, appears throughout the finished film. The Bachelors also had a scene with Bruce watching a chat show presented by an original character, Vondell Millions, described as a radiant black host. A radiant black talk show host in a script written in 1993 to 94. Who sounds like Vondell Millions, Montel Williams? In the scene, a couple of psychologist guests critically discuss Batman the hero. This seems to have been adapted from a scene from The Dark Knight Returns, in which a couple of experts discuss Batman on a TV show, only to be interrupted by the third guest, managing editor of the Daily Planet, Lana Lang, who is about to use expletives live on air, but the show's host intercepts her for the sake of the TV network. While this was satire in 1986, between 1993 to 1994, when Batmanforever was being written, TV talk shows now encouraged bad behaviour for ratings. This was the year that the king of trash TV would go into fifth gear. In the Batmanforever scene, Chase Meridian interrupts the experts and does use an expletive, to which host Vondell Millions is receptive to and makes fun of Chase to a vocal, jeering audience. No such scene exists in Akiva Goldsman's production script, but according to Drew Griffin from 1995 Batman, this scene became condensed into a news report at the scene of the film's opening bank robbery, where Chase uses the expletive. It ended up in the film as a silent visual of Chase that Batman looks at later on. Another deleted scene, and not in the production script, has Bruce watching a news report where Batman is criticised by another character created for the movie, newsreader Kenneth Frequency. The name of the character comes from a well-known event that happened in 1986, in which CBS newsreader Dan Rather was assaulted by two strangers in public, who were heard by Rather to have said the name Kenneth, followed by the words, "What's the frequency?" before disappearing. The finished film also has a character called Gossip Gertie, created by Akiva Goldsman, based on society matrons mentioned throughout The Bachelor's earlier draft. Gertie was played by Elizabeth Sanders, who was married to Batman co-creator Bob Kane, and she described the character as an old Hollywood gossip columnist by way of Oprah Winfrey. She has a TV show that we never see called Good Morning Gotham, yet another reference to The Dark Knight Returns. And of course in the plot, Nygma's manipulative invention, the box, right down to its name, is clearly a satirical substitute device for television. It makes you part of the entertainment, but invites itself to know your secrets and dirty laundry. It's a lot like how we experience the internet today, isn't it? Actually, in Akiva Goldsman's earlier draft, Riddler likens the box
to an information superhighway
in the voice of then American President Bill Clinton, which were his own words for promoting the internet at the time. From all of this, we can see that Batmanforever has a long strand concerning media consumption, tabloid and celebrity, the zombie-like addiction to the glut of around-the-clock cable television channels of the 1990s. If you really wanted to read into it, Batmanforever kind of aligns with another Warner Brothers film of the year it was made, also about tabloid TV, starring Tommy Lee Jones, with Joe Grafasi playing another guard character. God, I don't want to die. Natural Born Killers. Production designer Barbara Ling told Film Review that she admired the work of designers Anton Furst and Bo Welch on the Tim Burton Batman movies. However, to Ling, their work was capturing more of a decoism in a brutalist form. She felt Batmanforever was more fantasy. The vision for Gotham City, much like Bo Welch on Batman Returns, began with the World's Fairs of the 20s, 30s and 40s, in which tiny humans were dwarfed by enormous buildings. The Finnish exhibition at the World's Fair inspired the walls of the Batcave. Alongside this was the influence of early 20th century American designer Raymond Loewy and architect Hugh Ferris, with a desire for large proportioned structures. Like Bo Welch, Joel Schumacher wanted large human forms and faces throughout the city, but for completely different reasons to Batman Returns. Whereas Welch wanted the feeling of fascism to suggest corruption and oppression, Schumacher, experienced as a world-class fashion window dresser of mannequins, knew how we invest emotions in the human form, and his reasoning for the human sculptures was to give the city personality. Plus, Ling looked at the Deco and Gothic abandoned subways of New York City. There would be a modern twist to all of this retro design. Visual effects art director James Hegedus described to Cinefex how the Gotham architectural philosophy was to take old 40 to 50 story buildings and retrofit them to 80 to 90 stories. This was not dissimilar to Anton Furst's idea on Tim Burton's original Batman of having no zoning in Gotham City, so it appeared to be built upwards in a cavernous way with the older parts of the buildings at the bottom. According to Cinefex, Ling took a 4-day trip to Japan to study the country's futuristic architecture. The Gotham City of Batmanforever was to be cosmopolitan, diverse, full of culture, old and new, but timeless. Schumacher's Gotham City would be populated by largely timeless vehicles such as Studebaker police cars. His intent was to blend every decade from the 1930s to the 2000s. Barbara Ling told both SFX and Film Review magazines that Gotham's architectural style melds German Art Deco, Russian constructivism, European and American futurism, Gothic and Baroque, modernism and postmodernism. In Film Review, she said the influences all mashed into a fusion of a new weird surrealism. She told SFX, "I was fusing them all together to create what I call a new Gothic or something. I was trying to create a monumental rather than a claustrophobic city." Isn't it interesting that Schumacher and Ling were basically given free rein to do what they wanted with Gotham City, and yet in many ways they ended up doing variations on very similar ideas to things that we'd already seen in Tim Burton's Batman movies? Burton's Gotham had an atmospheric mix of monochromatic scenery, but Schumacher had created very similar worlds prior to Batman, while mixing in warm colours, which at times he also got into Batmanforever. Chase Meridian's apartment is an example of this, based on the Art Nouveau design of Prague Castle. Concept artist Tim Flattery and Barbara Ling designed the new Batmobile, with alien designer H.R. Giger himself attempting a look. In February 1994, Charlie Zurian and Alan Pike of TFX created the new Batmobile. 3 types of car were made. They worked 100 hours a week to get the work done. It was 25 feet long, 10.5 feet high, including the fin, with a Chevy engine, a carbon fiber body, and a max speed of around 120 miles per hour. VIP Marine Inc. in Oregon built the Batboat with the ribbing provided by TFX. On 1989's Batman, Gotham City was constructed as a gigantic backlot set at Pinewood Studios in England, with most of the interiors created on sound stages. Scenes featuring Wayne Manor, the Axis Chemical Factory, and the Gotham Globe newspaper were photographed on English locations. Matte paintings and miniatures filled in the wider shots of Gotham City. For Batman Returns, the entire film was photographed on sound stages of the Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, California, and Universal Studios in Hollywood. Some scenes featuring Gotham alleyways were photographed on the Warner backlot. A country road was photographed at Griffith Park in Los Angeles. Matte paintings and miniatures filled in the wider shots of Gotham City. Both films contain an elaborate car chase featuring the Batmobile. In Batman, despite the enormous street set, it's easy to recognize the intricately detailed points of interest in the city, as they were also used for the dialogue scenes with actors. on Batman Returns, many of the Gotham roads were reserved for the driving scenes. They were much narrower, more simplified, covered in shadow and redressed for different shots. In both cases, the Batmobile was very limited in where it could go. For Batman Forever, the Batmobile scenes were filmed mostly on the existing streets of Los Angeles and New York City, but dressed in oversized statues. It afforded limitless, impressive city backgrounds for the Batmobile to drive against. Barbara Ling chose Exchange Place near Wall Street in Manhattan, which was very narrow with tall buildings, creating the canyon-like, caricatured look of a comic book city. For the film's opening bank heist, the busy 6-lane Figueroa Street in downtown Los Angeles had 100 feet of narrow 25-foot tall shopfronts assembled in front of the lanes. It ended up with a very similar narrow effect with just 2 lanes. Right next to it was the Japanese-style 801 Tower, and a sculpted garden called Sangha Madare, created by artist Andrew Lester. In the film's press kit, Schumacher said his Gotham was based on New York City, as Bob Kane more or less based the city of the comics on the Big Apple. Gotham was part Manhattan, parts of LA, and they made up the rest. In their review of the 1989 Batman, The Hollywood Reporter wrongly observed that the New York mayor Ed Koch played the mayor of Gotham in that film. The mayor of Gotham in Batman Forever clearly reflects New York's own first black mayor of the time of scriptwriting, David Dinkins. Gotham feels cleaner and arguably more revitalized than in the Burton movies. Other New York locations included the National Museum of the American Indian at Whitehall and Bowling Green as the Ritz Gotham, Surrogate's Court Building on Chambers Street as Gotham Municipal Police Complex, and the Manhattan Bridge as the exterior of Two-Face's lair. These were all dressed in statues and sculptures carved out of foam. A few miles away, the Webb Institute of Naval Architecture in Glen Clove, Long Island, doubled as the Wayne Manor exterior. Back in California, an oil refinery in Carson became the piped exterior of Riddler's Claw Island. As on Batman Returns, much of the soundstage work would be shot at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, California, and Universal Studios, Universal City, California. Warner Brothers Stage 16 was home to the Second Bank of Gotham and Riddler's Lair. Universal Studios hosted the interior support tower of Riddler's Lair. Some of the sets were to be truly unusually enormous, well beyond the size of a studio soundstage. This led to some of the biggest sets being created inside of Howard Hughes' Spruce Goose Hangar in nearby Long Beach, California. Several sets could be contained simultaneously within the same stage. It was 190 feet from floor to ceiling, a 600-foot circumference, a 200-foot ceiling at 140,000 square feet. The 60-foot-tall Batcave had a rotating raising platform. The Wayne Enterprises office was 150 foot long, as well as the multi-story front interior of Wayne Manor. With so much of the movie filmed with live effects on echoey sets, 2/3 to 90% of the dialogue had to be re-recorded in post-production using automated dialogue replacement. According to Joel Schumacher on his director's commentary, Batman Forever had an unusually tight budget. According to producer Peter McGregor Scott, the film's entire budget was no more than that of Batman Returns. Depending on what production source you read, 60 to 90 sets were needed for the making of the movie, dozens more than on the previous Batman films. So not everything could be built from scratch. 2 Los Angeles theaters were adapted to contain several interior settings seen in the movie. Various rooms in the Los Angeles theater became a casino, a hairdressing salon, and a jeweler's. The lobby of the Pantages Theatre in Hollywood hosted the interior roof of the Ritz Gotham. In his review of Batman, Roger Ebert had made a comment about the moody Batman movie being what he called a tragic book as opposed to a comic book. Coincidentally, Schumacher said in various publicity for Batman Forever that he wanted to make a live-action comic book and that they're called comic books and not tragic books. The Riddler's contraption, the box, is tonally a more fantastical science fiction element with its abstract visual grammar, which was new territory for these Batman movies compared to the relatively more grounded but not exactly realistic fantasy of Tim Burton's movies. Technology and science fiction is integral to the plot of Batman Forever, and both the characters of Bruce Wayne and Edward Nygma. This is also a movie where cars drive up the side of buildings, where hundreds of miles worth of escape pod piping links Bruce Wayne's office to Wayne Manor, and wire grappling hooks can hold limitless amounts of weight. Schumacher's design brief to his cast and crew was to make a living comic book. Unlike Tim Burton's Batman films, and no doubt connected to the desire to make a family-friendly film, Batmanforever can't quite work out what exactly its comic book look actually is. The director, the writers, and many heads of department looked at many Batman comics dating from 1939 onwards. Schumacher and production designer Barbara Ling, who had designed Falling Down for Schumacher, found that visually, great license was taken with colour throughout all of the various comic iterations of Batman. They especially noted the great washes of colour, where whole pages could be in one tone, even elements that wouldn't naturally be, such as grass, water and sky. Barbara Ling was particularly taken by the work of colorist Lynn Varley on Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. Oscar-nominated cinematographer Steven Goldblatt was approached to light the film. He was very enthusiastic about the concept of using washes of colour and the photographic boldness that could come from it. Schumacher encouraged spinning, Dutching camera work. Goldblatt chose to hire a Technicrane for the entirety of the production, as its elegant moves were a fast way of getting the film to look good quickly. He also opted for some extreme wide-angle lenses. Consistent bright colour had not really been seen in a live-action Batman production since the 1960s Adam West Batman TV series. The show had pushed the limits of colour television in the 60s in the design, lighting and costumes when the medium was still in its infancy. Despite the use of Dutch tilted camera angles, the show was not used as a visual reference on Batmanforever. While Tim Burton's movies were known for their dark, gothic atmosphere, 1989's Batman arguably had an actual character as a colour wash, or 2 or 3 washes. The Joker. Across the gloomy monochrome shades of Gotham City, green, white, red and purple appeared, an anti-establishment villain, represented like human spray-painted graffiti. There's even a moment in the film that makes a point of it. This style also made its way into the film's marketing. Batman Returns was even more monochromatic, appearing in shades of near black and white, fitting the blurred morality of the movie. But it still had beautiful washes like this, to give colour-associated emotions and storytelling. The use of colour in Batmanforever was very much baked into the earlier draft by The Bachelors, but it had a storytelling purpose. The Batmobile was written to have a whitish blue light underneath it that turns purple and then red as it hits maximum speed. It was the starting point for this in the final film. The script also featured a set piece in which Two-Face's helicopter flies over Arkham Square, which Barbara Ling describes as the Las Vegas of Gotham City. Batman is dragged over a series of 5 animated billboards, a happy little pigtail girl blowing bubbles, a cigarette advert blowing smoke, a coffee pot, an Energizer bunny, a freckle-faced kid eating a hot dog, Batman kicks his front teeth out, and a Nike 3D bouncing basketball billboard. In the film, this sequence is reduced to 1 electric billboard. But the concept of electric signage seemed to inform the rest of Gotham City's colour in Batmanforever. The Bachelor's script specified that Dick Grayson takes a joyride on a neon street. And of course, key to the plot, Riddler's box device creates laser trails of green and blue energy. Cinematographer Steven Goldblatt spoke of a colour scheme for each of the characters. Two-Face is red and magenta, Riddler green, Batman whites, blues and purples, and Chase is pink. Although we never really see her near the colour pink. Batmanforever was to be more vibrant, somewhat more in line with another comic book movie of that era. The design team behind the 1990 movie Dick Tracy decided to use only 6 to 7 colours on screen. The film was emulating the style of the Chester Gould comic strips that they were based on. While it wasn't always possible to stick to the prescribed colours, Dick Tracy, like Tim Burton's Batman, created its own contained, stylized world, built in a movie studio, giving it a uniform feel of look and texture. Batmanforever, on the other hand, was filmed in all kinds of different real locations and studio sound stages, with a huge variety of textures and styles. Dick Tracy's cinematographer Vittorio Storaro, shot the film without the use of smoke and atmospherics, as they would dull the film's very specific, limited colours. Stephen Goldblatt didn't subscribe to these rules and logic in Batmanforever, and I'm not sure he subscribed to any rules or logic at all, as the style constantly changes from scene to scene and shot to shot. For example, 4 key scenes from Batmanforever were impressively lit with computer-controlled lighting rigs used for music concerts, which minimised the days needed to rig the lights from 4 to 1. The coloured lights and lighting effects are visibly part of the set in Pan-Asia Town, the Nigmatech Party, the circus, and Riddler's lair. Yet, often when Two-Face is on screen, red light is projected, particularly onto the villain's face. It has no logical purpose or reason to be there. The translucent, human skin-like texture of that makeup is lost under the blotchy red lighting. The moments in the film where Two-Face is photographed in diffused and white light look so much more convincing because of it. Red neon tubes were also inexplicably attached to the guns of Two-Face's goons that give a different effect to the colour red. In a few of the flashback scenes, light and shadow was physically painted into the set, a technique that the film crew took directly from the German expressionist film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. This shot in the Batcave is a perfect recreation of a frame from The Dark Knight Returns, with Bruce standing in a white painted area that looks like a pool of light. Less successful is this circular street lamp from The Murder of Bruce Wayne's Parents, recreating this iconic panel from Batman Year One. If, by the film's own logic, the painted circle is supposed to be light from a lamppost, then what is this hotspot of real light here? That's the problem. While the film more than deservedly gained its Oscar nomination for Best Cinematography, and is often very visually impressive, half of the film seems to embrace the comic book panel colour wash approach, while the other half seems to ignore it in favour of naturalism and darkness. Another example would be how Chase's apartment is warm, realistic and Art Nouveau inside, but has a skyline view of cut-out neon blue buildings. What world are we supposed to be in exactly? How is the audience supposed to accept the on-screen world if the visual tone isn't consistent? Of course, the same could be said of the film's performances. It's ironic, or rather hugely appropriate, that a film about psychology and duality is presented as half earnest and half as a loud cartoon. In the press kit for the movie, hairdresser Yolanda Toussaint notes that Joel wanted someone every now and then to look slightly off. Maybe they have strange coloured hair, like orange or blue or yellow, or maybe the end of their nose is slightly turned up, or they have a long pointed chin. Occasionally, you can see the odd person in a brightly coloured wig to help give the impression of a colour wash to a shot, but it's not very consistent. Often the Baroque statues, loud colours and yin-yang Two-Face imagery feels much like the Prince music videos used to promote 1989's Batman. Structural changes in the film's editing process also affected the design of the film and its logic. The movie originally began with Two-Face escaping from Arkham Asylum, Bruce Wayne meeting Edward Nygma, Bruce exiting the Batcave and driving to the bank to stop Two-Face's heist. Nygma kills his boss Fred. Bruce receives the puzzle from Riddler. He takes it to Chase Meridian. They go for a date to the circus where Dick Grayson's parents are killed. Dick is adopted by Bruce. Chase uses the bat signal to lure Batman in for some romance, followed by the car chase with Two-Face. In the finished film, Two-Face escaping from Arkham Asylum was removed entirely. Batman suits up and drives to the bank heist. Bruce Wayne meets Nygma and then exits to the Batcave. Chase uses the bat signal to lure Batman in for some romance. Nygma kills his boss, Fred. Bruce gets a puzzle from the Riddler. He takes it to Chase Meridian. They go for a date to the circus where Dick's parents die. Dick is adopted by Bruce, and then a car chase happens with Two-Face. Dramatically, these changes were an improvement, but in terms of the film's very specific colour design, it causes chaos for the viewer. In the original script and as photographed, this shot of Gotham was to appear after Nygma has killed his boss, the first time we see a green colour cast in the film, and just before we first see the Riddler. It makes creative sense then to see the green light across the tall building, to highlight the birth of this villain, especially as it's then revealed that Batman has just been called out by Chase, setting off false alarm. It gets us guessing. In the finished film, the shot appears before Nigma kills his boss, so the light is now just a random shade of green for no reason across a building. Also in the original script as shot, Batman jumps off a bridge and lands in the Batmobile. Note the red light illuminating the underside of the traffic bridge. Batman was to then drive off into a car chase with Two-Face. The geography is set up, making it clear that all of this happens in the underpass with red lighting. However, as edited in the film, these two sequences were split in two, so Batman drives off from the red bridge, and the car chase happens much later in the movie. It is introduced with this establishing shot of the Batmobile in a completely different location and colour, so we have absolutely no sense of geography. It is not clear at all that this is the same underpass location that Batman jumped into many scenes earlier. Instead, it looks like Batman has randomly driven into an outdoor disco or something. The Arkham Asylum exterior is washed in theatrical red lighting, but the monochrome interior looks like it's from a completely different, more realistic movie. It was supposed to appear at the beginning of the film, where the interior is also full of red lightning, but was moved to the end of the movie where the interiors were not set during a storm. Sometimes the self-conscious use of colour and design cancels out the intent of the writing. Two-Face's lair is described as dark and decadent on Spice's side versus chipper and conservative on Sugar's side. Heavy metal meets house and garden, but it doesn't read. Sugar's side doesn't look conservative or house and garden, but instead resembles the worst decadent taste of Liberace. The gag needed the kind of contrast that Tim Burton brought to similar scenes in Batman Returns, where the threatening and the comfortable coexist. When everyone and everything is loud and colourful like this, the colour has no impact. Equally frustrating is when the film doesn't commit to the design, probably for reasons of budget. The box is realised initially as abstract science fiction imagery, with pulsating lasers and projected moving images, but later on in the film, we get scenes where it is presented on TV in low-rent form, with actors against cardboard backings that make it look like the Soul Glow commercial from the comedy film Coming to America. The Bachelor's script, by comparison, had an imaginative scene in which Chase Meridian uses the box to turn black and white, dancing with Fred Astaire. Also in the Bachelor's script, Nigma's domed island hideout was a projection hall of mirrors where Batman witnesses the biggest fears that the box has extracted from his mind: his parents' murder and the previous Batman villains. In the film, it just becomes a big light-up venue that could be anywhere, for absolutely no reason. In that climax at the lair, the ground beneath Batman inexplicably becomes a disappearing hologram. As written, it is revealed to be a hologram that Batman is about to step through prior to its disappearance. But in the film that setup isn't there, so it doesn't really make much sense. In the script, the whole point of Batman wearing a special sonar suit was that it enabled him to spot the trick floor. Another instant is at the Nigmatech party. The entire event was originally written to be themed as garish Art Deco meets punk. Akiva Goldsman's first draft then improved on this description as a kind of Versailles meets punk meets couture, with Nigma dressed as Louis XIV. In the final script and film, this is removed, and the only people dressed anything like this are the live band in this shot, which bafflingly was used to establish the scene. Some waiting staff were also designed to match this design theme, but they're not visible in the finished film. While there is great inconsistency with this colour wash approach, and sometimes it makes the film appear garish in places, some of the colour washes are gorgeous, especially when motivated. The Pan-Asia town location is exactly the place where you would expect to have light and colour, and on screen it looks spectacular and totally appropriate. This moment from the Batman Joyride looks like it's from the pages of Frank Miller's Batman Year One come to life. It's shadowy and dark, full of atmosphere, and features some coloured windows which are reminiscent of this shot from the 1989 Batman movie. The most exciting sequence of colour is the following alleyway scene, in which graffiti and tribal tattoos were UV painted in dayglow and lit with black light, reminiscent of artists such as Kenny Scharf or the Electric Circus Club from the 1960s, which was once owned by Andy Warhol, whom Schumacher knew personally. The gang of Mexican Day of the Dead ornaments come to life, wearing holy cards on their chests. It's also a great scene, a literal playground fight for the teenage hero, a version of Orpheus in the Underworld, with the words Orpheum dotted around like the Sunnyside sign from Schumacher's hometown of Queens. One of my favourite touches by Schumacher and Goldblatt is the lighting burst that happens when Dick kisses the girl he has rescued. It becomes brighter the moment their lips touch each other. Schumacher's use of big heads and faces evoke a cultural feeling of street art and murals, reminding us of Barbara Ling's concept for Gotham City. Diverse, new and old, just like a real contemporary big city. It makes me think of contemporary New York mural artists of that time, the work of City Walls Inc. in the 60s and 70s. And of course, Schumacher's earlier movies. There are other clever design motifs throughout the movie, like how many of the sets have ceiling rafters, linked together by the circus top that Dick Grayson's parents fall from, and the girders that Two-Face perishes from. Schumacher and Ling also used round shapes repeatedly throughout the film. Maybe Ling and Schumacher put them in there for symbolic reasons in relation to psychology, spirituality, and duality. And maybe they just thought they looked nice. Another clever touch is the use of flickering Tesla-style electrical lighting in Nigma's lair. Later at the Nigmatech party, he is stood near light bulbs that possess a similar effect, to visually show that despite his ascent to professional success, he's still the same chaotic person underneath. Mixed into this is a warmer and much more naturalistic approach to the scene set in Wayne Manor, Chase's office, the Batcave, as well as Bruce Wayne's own office. It matches the low-key, more realistic performance styles of the characters of these scenes. When the movie breathes and goes for a more human approach, it's wonderful. For the film's many visual effects, producer Peter McGregor Scott contacted visual effects Oscar winner John Dykstra of Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica fame, who had recently closed down his visual effects company, Apogee. Dykstra told Action Heroes magazine at the time, the Frank Miller Dark Knight Returns comic books are a very strong influence in terms of what this movie's images would be like. Every image in the books indicated motion to come or motion completed. I saw the perspectives were forced, and I could already envision that this movie would be a very exciting way to bring those stills to life. It is true that while Batmanforever and The Dark Knight Returns are tonally a world apart, the kinetic, relentless rollercoaster energy and visceral comic action of that graphic novel is clearly visible in the movie's visuals. The film opens with a helicopter chase in which Batman swings from a chain around Gotham City that looks like it was directly adapted from The Dark Knight Returns. The film's visual effects were state-of-the-art. Batman took a huge leap into digital effects and computer-generated imagery, with a 3D CGI title sequence, which oddly feels a bit more Superman than Batman, and a computer-generated bat signal by company Metrolite. 2D animated matte paintings created in Photoshop by Illusion Arts. Rhythm and Hues created a fully 3D environment for this sequence. A new digital facility, Warner Bros. Imaging Technology, was set up by the studio. The plan was for the Warner Bros. Owned visual effects company to begin building a digital asset library for further DC films set in Metropolis, Gotham City, or wherever. This was decades before the arrival of the DC movie universe. Warner Imaging Technology oversaw 3D digital matte paintings, a full computer-generated fly-through shot of Gotham City in daylight that took a year to realize using photos of the Rockefeller Plaza as texture maps. Computer-generated backgrounds were made for a computer-generated Batman with flowing computer-generated cape created through the use of motion capture of a gymnast by video game company Acclaim and animated by Pacific Data Images, who created this fully computer-generated sequence. Pacific Data Images also digitally corrected a wobbly miniature shot of the statue of Lady Gotham exploding. This shot contains a motion tracked-in matte background of Gotham. The film also had 2D digital effects, computer-generated rotor blades, digital wire removal, digital compositing, and post-production company E-Film did most of the film scanning to unify the look of the movie's colour gamma curves, blackness levels and sharpness. More traditional forms of visual effects were also used, such as glass matte paintings with rear projection, created by Illusion Arts. The energy trails from Nigma's box were realised by photographing lasers reflected on mylar, a technique Dykstra had used on the film Life Force 10 years before. And the production of course used motion control and high-speed miniature photography, of which there was so much that Dykstra had to bring in his former colleagues from Apogee to oversee the work. Eric Durst handled the city miniatures, Boyd Shermus the other miniatures, including the Batwing and Claw Island. The Gotham City miniature model was 100 feet long, 25 to 50 feet wide, and up to 50 feet tall. It took 4 months to assemble. It reused and prefabricated many miniatures previously built for the film The Hudsucker Proxy, and had also appeared in comic hero movie The Shadow. Computer-generated 3D storyboards known as animatics were used for many of the visual effects scenes. An Amiga computer with a personal animation recorder board, costing $4,000, was connected to a video tap on the camera, allowing for playback of motion control effects elements. Digital buildings and skies were added to the miniatures. All of the miniatures were filmed in another Hughes hangar in Playa del Rey, a 45-minute drive away from the Warner Brothers studios in Burbank. Because of this distance, still images of the effects shots were uploaded to a Mac computer and sent via America Online email to the studio, saving huge amounts of time. Scenes with a miniature Batwing crash and submarine were filmed in a tank at the Los Angeles Swim Stadium. Some of these visual effects weren't even visual effects, but lighting tricks, filmed entirely in camera by cinematographer Stephen Goldblatt. These included interior shots of the Batmobile driving, the Batwing flying, Batman and Robin falling through Riddler's lair in close-up. Behind the actors was a spinning drum with question-marked holes through which light was projected. The entire scene atop the Gotham police station, and the cliff tops of Riddler's lair. Goldblatt's creativity extended to this action scene featuring Dick Grayson. Of course, Chris O'Donnell's stunt performer Mitch Gaylord did perform a 14-foot leap across 30 feet for the actual set, but for this one overhead shot, the background is a painted backdrop. Stephen Goldblatt had used this technique previously on the movie Lethal Weapon for this shot. But while these old cinema tricks were still being employed, digital wizardry had infiltrated other areas of the production. Artist Mary LaCottle used Adobe Photoshop to create some of the film's concept art in hours as opposed to days. Adobe Photoshop was also used by Rick Baker to conceptualize the makeup of Two-Face. The Batmobile was designed using computer program Autoshop, and perhaps most revolutionary for a Batman movie, the film was edited digitally on the non-linear Lightworks system. Burbank-based Soundstorm used digital tools for the film's post-production sound mix. About 1% of the sound effects came from libraries, the rest was bespoke for the production, recorded digitally on a Fostex PD2 DAT recorder. The designers flew to various locations to capture these sounds, including the Mojave Desert for motorbike and car sounds, Oklahoma City for the soaring acoustics of a Bud Light mini-jet, Canoga Park, where space shuttle engines are made, Pomona Fairplex Raceway for the sounds of tire squeals, and most exotically, Puerto Rico and its Cave of Snakes for the noise of bats. The ambience of the Batmobile interior was actually the Puerto Rican hire car used by the sound designers to drive around on their trip. On a very tight post-production schedule, the sound work didn't begin until April 3rd, 1995, and 2 weeks later, a temp sound mix was produced. On May the 17th, the final mix started ahead of a June 16th release date. Pro Tools 3 was used to play back the music for the final mix. Also returning on the design side was costume designer Bob Ringwood, who states that he was brought on at Warner Brothers' insistence. He adapted the Batman costume to the athletic and panther-like figure of Val Kilmer. Kilmer told VH1 that his costume didn't breathe and that it would shrink. A team of 25 worked on the costumes for 6 months. 2 people worked exclusively just on the capes. 130 Batman and Robin suits were made for the production. According to Action Heroes magazine, The Riddler's outfit was made from green stretch velvet. His jacket, which appears in the later scene, had 2,500 LED lights attached to it, all controlled by computer. A real sleeper earring was worn by Chris O'Donnell for Robin. No other cast member wore real ear piercings in the film. Batman co-creator Bob Kane didn't understand the reasoning for the very fashionable piercing. There was some fascination at the time with the nipples on the Batsuit and a homoerotic feeling to the movie. I'll let the newspapers from the time speak for themselves. Chris O'Donnell told the Daily Mirror that Schumacher had been asked questions by reporters such as how will you deal with the homoerotic relationship between Batman and Robin. Schumacher, who was gay himself, joked to Film Review at the time, "Actually, I've been very clever in planting a seed because Batman is having a homosexual relationship with Alfred the butler, and I brought Robin in to cover it over." Schumacher claims that he was told not to film a shot of Batman's backside, but he thought women would like it. When he showed the shot to a test audience, 400 women screamed and cheered at the sight of it. It's true that the male form, nipples, muscles and backsides are littered throughout the movie, but so is a slow-motion upskirt shot of Chase Meridian, or rather her stunt double Dana He, the 1988 Olympic Taekwondo gold medalist. Schumacher said in the film's DVD commentary that he often got criticism for objectifying his actors, to which he offers no apology. He was an actor's director and former fashion designer who made everyone look glamorous. Chris O'Donnell had mentioned about thinking twice at his costume fitting when handed what he described as a thong jockstrap to wear under his Robin costume. In many scenes, everyone had to wear one to accommodate the body-hugging and unusual costumes. There was a level of camp in the Adam West Batman TV show, but it was supporting a consistent farcical tone. There's definitely a fabulous side to Batmanforever, much more in touch with the 1990s obsession with the camp of 1970s disco. Note the use of shiny leotards, leopard print suits, wigs, drag queens, tiaras, platform boots, feather boas, and disco lighting. In one scene of The Bachelor's Draft, the Riddler was to have danced around at a crime scene, dressed like a member of the Village People.
I haven't had that much luck with women.
The previous Batman films were about the underdogs, where beautiful people get their comeuppance from the undesirable freaks. Batmanforever is about how everyone is weird, regardless of how beautiful they are and how well they've got it together on the outside. Unlike Tim Burton's Batman, Joel Schumacher's is less about troubled introverts in a cold world and more about troubled extroverts in a hopeful world. It's also not that bigger a cast than Burton's movies, but it has an ensemble feeling in line with Schumacher's love of Robert Altman, especially with doubled-up characters living dual lives. It's interesting to see a big Gotham City full of large crowd scenes, which we hadn't seen since the 1989 Batman movie. It is also held together by the charismatic lead performance of Val Kilmer, who seemed to know from starring in films such as the classic spoof Top Secret that there's great strength in playing a lead character straight, even if the world around him is bonkers. I think one of the best scenes in the film is the entire circus sequence. It begins with rousing music and a sense of wonder. It's a Trojan horse of a scene that ends in tragedy. If you were a comic book fan, or had even seen Batman the Animated Series, you knew exactly what was going to happen the moment the Grayson family appear on screen. There's a wonderful moment where, true to the duality theme of the movie, the loud and theatrical ringmaster takes a quiet breather to wipe the sweat from his brow in the shadows. I remember how you could hear a pin drop in the audience at this point. It's suspense upon suspense during the Grayson's acrobatics. The whole scene plays out in real time, and the geography across a giant location is effortlessly laid out. Schumacher told Bobby Wygant it was complicated to stage and film. Playing with the tabloid TV element of the movie, the event is broadcast live on television, and Edward Nygma, laughing along at home alone, says more about his character than any exposition could. This television watching is another great section that seemed to be unscripted and made in post-production. Batman Returns had Batman the Outsider watching from the shadows, but here he's in the ring and completely responsible. This includes the noble moment where Bruce stands up without hesitation and gives away his secret identity. And the look on Dick's face when he knows he's too late. I also love the initial meeting between Bruce Wayne and Edward Nygma, how Wayne handles his employee as an equal when his eccentric behaviour is getting the better of him. I love the vast deco setting that brings back memories of the Lois and Clark TV show of the same era. Or the triumphant end set piece. Producer Peter McGregor Scott also helped give the film lots of great action and trailer shots. Of course, the film has an enormous tonal conflict. Some of it is super comedic and some of it is super dramatic, and sometimes the two tones collide and clash nonsensically. It wants to be child and family friendly, violent but harmless, dark and sexy, bright but moody. Elliot Goldenthal's music score also alternates between the dark and earnest and the loud tongue-in-cheek in a shrieking Looney Tunes style. Along with the stylized colours, cartoony sound effects and loud performances, it often softens and undermines the dark and violent nature of Batman and his world. But I still think Joel Schumacher got more right than wrong. According to Akiva Goldsman, there was a cut of the film called Preview 1. It was used for a test screening with audiences during editing of the film in late 1994. It keeps to the structure that was initiated by The Bachelors and most significantly ties up Bruce Wayne's dark and psychological subplot of guilt and shame, with our hero confronting the giant bat. I have not seen this edit. Superhero Stuff You Should Know, who saw the cut, reported that it was an incomplete, work-in-progress work print of the film, and while it adopts the shooting script structure, it doesn't change the tone too much or make it drastically different. That said, Drew Griffin from 1995 Batman also saw the cut, and stated that with inclusion of raw production sound and temp music, which included Danny Elfman's music from Batman Returns, it's in many ways a tonally different piece. Does the Red Book and giant bat confrontation subplot improve the film and make it deeper and darker? While I can't comment on the cut, it must be remembered there was no grand plan from the beginning to make a dark film that became lighter. The plan from the beginning was to make a lighter Batman film, and as I have explained in this video, it was a work in progress that got lighter and lighter with a lot of second guessing. For example, using temporary digital edits, the sound editors of the movie pitched to Schumacher to use cartoony sound effects in order to soften the dark and scary elements of the film. I love the idea of Bruce having not dealt with his past trauma. I love seeing more of the film in the more adult style that Schumacher excelled at. Tonally, Goldsman's thread of the Red Book is just right for this, and Schumacher is in his element when visualizing inner psychological fear and trauma. But to be honest, I can see why both were cut. The written words of the scenario that killed Bruce Wayne's parents aren't strong enough. The book in itself shouldn't have been a visual, but the contents of it. Why not the image of Zorro as a silhouette, especially as Zorro was a pulp character that no doubt influenced the creation of Batman? Now that would really marry to the image of a bat. Of course, I would love to see Preview 1 released, but it was never finished in a releasable form. And how can you make it releasable when both the director and editor have since passed? Between all of the various scripts, especially the excellent Bachelor draft, plus the film's various edits, there's a great film there. But not all of it was shot or as written. Tonally, the film really comes alive and is most consistent and dignified with the scenes of Dick and Robin. They are all played straight without the Looney Tunes sound effects, cartoon music and comedy. They show a giant, exciting adult world through the eyes of a teenager with a teenage mindset. There is great excitement in discovering the Batcave through Dick's eyes for the first time, or the joyride that makes the Batmobile the centre of Gotham City's attention. Schumacher has said he grew up with Robin always being present in Batman's life. I wonder if there's a lot of personal truth to Robin's story that Schumacher engaged with. A bereaved child who couldn't stand childhood, who desperately wanted to fast-track into becoming an adult. One of the most personal details that Schumacher had custom made for the movie was this tree, from the final scene of the film. It was specifically built to be a nod to the haunting tree from the opening of the film Great Expectations. A similar tree appeared in both The Lost Boys and Flatliners, in both cases bringing out Schumacher's inner dark side. So it's clear that he did engage with the darker side of the Batman story. I think Joel Schumacher and his natural sensibility for the dark and sexy was absolutely the wrong choice for a McDonald's-geared lighter Batman film. I really believe we were cheated out of a Schumacher-directed adaptation of Frank Miller's Year One, or even a live-action Mask of the Phantasm movie, or just a direct continuation of the Burton movies. In the early 2000s, Peter McGregor Scott and film directors Vincent Ward and Andrew Davis directed the ultimate compromise between the gothic Burton sensibility and a Batman more accessible to a family audience. They used a lot of the art direction created for Schumacher's films, but dialed it down with Burton's gothic atmosphere. And recently, watching Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I saw a superhero swinging through a cosmopolitan American city with culture, murals, street art, and it took me back. Was it influenced by Batmanforever? Probably not. But it did remind me how I had once seen some of this sort of comic book imagery before. And when watching The Batman in 2022, there were some visuals that also took me back. It might be a tonally uneven adventure that can't quite work out its direction and identity in many areas. But in 1995, Batmanforever filled the cinema screens and there were queues around the block to see it. And of course, after making the movie, Schumacher didn't direct another Batman film, right? Apart from a quickly churned out sequel that used the theatrical cut of Batmanforever as a format template but ditched all of the interesting location filming and doubled down on the artifice. It has a theme roughly about family, but I have no idea what it's about specifically. Batmanforever never looked better than in the music video to U2's end credits song, Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me, directed by Kevin Godley and Maurice Linane, intercut with animated sections that look straight from the pages of The Dark Knight Returns. And that song's title kind of best describes the film's overall mission statement. Batmanforever simply wanted to hold you, thrill you, kiss you, and kill you. Just all at once. Please don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. Thank you.